that will submit a letter of intent. The sellers are going to want to get the most money they can get for a property. Different sellers look at it different ways. Some sellers, and we think the smarter ones, will go to a certain group of builders and ask for a letter of intent. So a seller might go to 5 builders that they have confidence in that are going to make it to the finish line. I'll answer in a minute. Whereas some other sellers will use a broker, for example, who says you'll get the best price if we put a package out describing your property to every builder under the sun and give them a deadline. By April 10th, I need a letter of intent if you're interested in my property. And you might get 20 responses back. 2 of them might be completely ridiculous prices that the market doesn't support, coming from people, builders, that might say, well, let me put it in at this, I'll take it, they'll grab it, they'll accept it. We'll start going through the contract process while I do all my homework to find out if I could really pay that price. But in the meantime, I'm taking it off the market from these other 19 builders. Some guys think that way, some builders do. Other builders are just going to put in what they really think the right price is. And if I don't get it, I don't get it. But I'm not going to pay more than this, and hopefully the seller knows that we're a legitimate builder that's going to back up our letter of intent. So it's a really unusual process that goes all over the place depending on the deal, but it's a critical piece. Almost nothing, no land gets sold without a letter of intent first, because the next process that Aaron's going to talk about is preparing a contract. Once the letter of intent is accepted from builder X, Y, or Z by the seller, then a contract gets prepared, either by the seller or the buyer.
So what is the letter of intent binding the 2 parties to require them to do, and what are they not
If
required?
you're going to negotiate a contract within a specific period of time, within the next 60 days, and also that the seller will not continue to market the property. So basically the property is off the market, and we agree that we're going to negotiate in good faith to a purchase and sale agreement within 60 days.
Okay, so there's no such thing as engaging in 2 LOIs at the same time?
That would not be good.
That would not be normal, but and I might be off base here, unless there's something signed by both parties in a letter of intent, and frequently both parties don't sign it. It might just be a letter signed by the prospective buyer. The seller could still be negotiating with 2 others. And 3 weeks into the deal that he accepted from builder A, he could say, hey, you know what, guy? This isn't going the way I want it to go. I'm done with you. Because now that's not
You wouldn't be
a good way to do business.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be incurring the cost of the purchase and sale agreement if you need a signed LOI.
Yeah.
So from the legal perspective on that, if we represent a seller, and a smart seller will bring the LOI to us and say, hey, we just got this, can you look it over and tell us what you think? We'll look at it, and the first thing we'll tell them is, regardless of what happens with this LOI, do not sign it, because it could conceivably be construed to be a contract. And if the LOI just has brief terms, and in the end, they're going to be selling under these terms that are good as a framework, but then do not include all of the aspects that a contract can include, it is not the seller, in the seller's best interest to sign that. Now, understanding that the builders want to take the contract, take that property off the market, we would look at the LOI as an offer from the builder to begin the negotiations in good faith. This is the starting point, and we all know in the end we're going to end up with a contract. A lot of times we'll get these LOIs and we'll see them, and if it's from the seller perspective and we see that there's a provision in it that says we're going to have this contract negotiated within 60 days, that can change rapidly. I mean, we have a contract we've been negotiating for over a year. I mean, it's impossible to know when you start down that road, going through each of the individual details that come up in a contract, how the parties are going to interact with one another. And if the understand development, that makes it go easier. Sometimes, if one of the parties is just a guy with a big piece of raw land who doesn't know anything about development, particularly if he decides he doesn't need counsel, that can make it
Everyone needs
extremely
counsel.
difficult on the builder side, because they're facing an uphill battle. They don't, this person thinks that they know what's best for them, but oftentimes they don't, and the builder can't tell them that, they won't listen. So it makes it very difficult, depending on the sophistication of the two parties that are interacting.
Purchase and sale agreement. Once an LOI is accepted, someone's going to prepare, either the seller or the buyer is going to prepare.
You want to control it. If you're the purchaser, I always want to control drafting the purchase and sale agreement. So I always try, at least try. And 50-50. And it can take, it can drag on for weeks. It could take 6 months just to negotiate an LOI, just based on the interest of the property in that submarket. So again, that seller is playing off of Stanley Martin and MI and Michael Harris, trying to get the best value, and says, so at some point you say, I'm out. And then a lot of times the best deals you do are the deals you walk away from, because MI or Stanley Martin or MV made expectations they couldn't meet. 6 months go by, they try to negotiate, and it comes back to you. So,
That happens a lot, where the high bidder takes it off the market. 6 months later, the second or third guy in line, or just the relation, gets a phone call. You still interested? By tomorrow, I want to see what you're willing to pay. You say, well, we already gave it to you. Okay, that's your final number? Yeah. And you might get the deal.
Yeah, and at that point, the leverage has completely shifted in the negotiation.
So when this market was roaring hot in the early part of the 2000s, I mean, your letters of intent were very short. Your study periods were very short. Your purchase price was pretty matter of fact. Your conditions to close were zoning. They weren't record plat, or they might have been, I'll close after feasibility. And you had investors lined up, and things were moving at a very rapid pace. Now land prices are back up to 2005, 2006 levels, and land deals don't seem to make sense right now, at least in certain submarkets. They may work for NVR, but they don't work for Michael Harris Homes. So you have a little more flexibility because there aren't as many letters of intent coming in on properties that are available. So, purchase and sale.
All right, so when we get into the aspects of, you take the letter of intent that you've gotten, which is the framework, and it is a very basic framework. It's trying to capture these business terms that they've been talking about all morning and putting them into something on paper that will be enforceable and will be able to be manipulated enough so that they can still make money on the back end, but yet keeping in mind that there are all sorts of variables and unknowns out there still at the time we sign the contract. Because generally, feasibility has not been done, title hasn't been looked at, there are a lot of unknowns when we sign the document. So part of what we do is trying to understand how off the rails the project could possibly go and build protections in as best as possible to protect the builder in those situations. So the aspects that come into play after you get past purchase price and the timing of closing and all that, if it's a raw land deal, that contract is typically a little bit more simple than if you're doing a finished lot with a takedown schedule, and that contract could be, it could last for years as far as you close on the initial and then you have subsequent takedowns that follow under that contract.
Let me just explain what a raw lot versus a takedown deal is. As a builder, we can buy from the seller the land, a farm. It could just be a farm that needs to go through the zoning process because it's an agricultural zone. Now we have to go through the whole process of getting it zoned and getting the lots split up into a subdivision. And very long, could take 2-3 years before we're ready to start work on the earthwork to develop the land. Or the other end of the extreme is we can buy in a community like Crown, where everything's approved through the county, the lots are already on the ground. We buy what's called a lot takedown. So we have to buy 5 lots a quarter, or 10 lots a quarter, so many, and they're finished lots. It's that simple from a purchase point of view. So there's 2 extremes, and then there's a bunch of in-betweens in how you buy land.
So in either of those situations, what you are trying to do is set the price, set an expectation for closing, and then also give yourself a way out in the event that something during the feasibility period crops up that makes this deal completely not worth it. Aspects of that could be an environmental issue. So you've got your consultants on the side working on the environmental side. You're looking at the survey. You get your title commitment. Part of what I do is reviewing title commitment and making sure that not only are the exceptions that are shown in the commitment, the various easements that have been granted over this piece of land, there to either serve lots that you are looking to purchase or are close enough to your raw land where you're not going to have to be paying a bunch of third parties for easements just to get water or sewer, et cetera, to a site. Maybe you are. Maybe you've got that built into your cake already as far as cost. The other aspects of that are making sure that when you're looking at the chain of title that it's clean, that the people who may own the land actually do, and there's not anything in the chain that could possibly crop up later that could cause you a problem. And title companies miss stuff. We did a deal just recently where the exceptions did not list this reservation that was in a deed buried in the past of this piece of property that essentially required the owner to convey a chunk of it off for stormwater management pond whenever this other party asked for it. So it's things like that that we run across and we're like, okay, this could be a showstopper. And then if you're reviewing that before you can get your contract signed, you can at least build into your contract with the seller, hey, we found this problem, let's solve it now in the contract so that when we close, we know that we're not going to have this issue moving forward that could possibly crop up. And whether that's the seller has to go back and track down a release from this other owner, you vacate that of record, there's all sorts of ways that you can solve that problem.
And to get at a higher level on that, there's almost every contract that's signed will give the buyer a period of time called feasibility to research and find out all the problems that might be there. Because the seller wants at the end of that feasibility period, they want to get all their money and walk away from it. That's ideal for them. The buyer wants as much time to do research and find all these, the land's complicated. It's not just what you see is what you get. The seller wants you to just take what you see is what you get, but you can't see everything. So that every contract's going to have that, and it's up to negotiating and the demand, supply and demand. If you got a real hot piece of property you're selling, you're probably going to be able to, as a seller, limit the feasibility to a shorter period of time because everybody wants it and they're willing to take the risk that they miss one of these items that they're trying to discover.
And I would say around here, I mean, we've got a lot of the land has already been developed. The stuff that's out there that's still undeveloped, there is something on it. There's some hair on it somewhere that you have to find. Whether it's what you were talking about, a stream that creates RPA that you can't develop in on either side of it, and you've got 2 strips along the side to work in, but oh wait, no, those have to be buffer. So there are a lot of things that come into play as far as when you see a piece of land, whether or not it is actually going to be used for the purpose that you think you could get it used for. Part of the other aspects of the contract that come in place, once you get your study period and the attorneys and the people who are the consultants trying to help you through feasibility, they want that study to be as long as possible so that we can do a thorough job and get back to you the information, have a discussion on it, let you figure out from a business perspective how much of this risk we're willing to accept and how much we're not and what the value of that is. So we like to be able to get our work done on the front end and get it back to you so you can make that decision, and then you can take it up the chain to the corporate people who make the decision on whether to move forward with the deal. So a lot of the timing in that, we always encourage our builders to back that time frame in to when they get their title commitment, when they get their environmental reports, when they get their survey, so that we have plenty of time to accomplish that for them in a thorough manner. The other aspects of it, when you're going through the negotiation of the contract, are the reps and warranties. So representations and warranties are, for the buyer, you want as many things as you can put into that category of the contract, because it's the seller telling you, I am telling you off the, right here, that I know that this property is zoned properly, it doesn't have any environmental issues. I've not received any violations of law from any county or government officials. I own the land. There's never been any kind of excavating done. There's no cemeteries. All these different things that we want to build into that section of the contract. And on the flip side, the seller is looking to cut out as many of those as possible and shift them over onto the builder, because those are feasibility issues. Hey, builder, go out and do your homework. Make sure it's not up to us to tell you whether you can use this land for what you want to. You do that research on your own. We're not going to represent that fact. So there's constant tug, push and pull between the builder and the seller, trying to figure out how much you can give the seller to accomplish for you on paper that you can then go back and enforce through the contract. And
So you're looking for, builders looking for guarantees.
yes,
They give them an out if something goes wrong. The seller's looking for the opposite. They don't want to promise anything. They might just say, to the best of our knowledge.
And-
Or they may say nothing.
And even in that statement, when you have those reps and warranties set out, you can, the term knowledge, who knows what that means? Is it, well, it's in the public record, so you should have known, or, well, you have this somewhere in the history of the property, you should have known? Is it a should have known standard? Is what is the best of your knowledge? Is it, well, somebody in your company should have known? And then there's, a lot of times it'll be limited to the actual knowledge of the one person who actually is familiar with the piece of ground, and it will list that person's name. And if that guy does not know, then nobody knew. So there are a lot of different ways to draft that.
Typically, it's me. They usually put my name in there.
And it's always his fault.
It's always my fault.
Just understand.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So those are some of the aspects of it that the attorneys will fight back and forth on, with one side wanting more and the other side wanting less. Then you get into your conditions to closing. If you're purchasing land that you are going to go through the entire entitlements process, then one of the conditions to closing is that you get that zoning in place, that you get your record plat, that you can get a certain number of lots. And you can set the contract up to be contingent on all of that to a degree. A seller is going to want an initial deposit, and typically, if you get that at the contract signing, it's not going to be a huge number. But as you progress through the contract, when you hit your due diligence period and you decide, okay, we think we're good with this, we're now ready to move on into the entitlements process, you'll give them a little more money to just, as a good faith representation that we're still moving forward with your deal, here's some deposit money, and typically that will not be refundable unless you have a seller who just is willing to be nice and give you that back in the event you pull the plug 3 years later. So you've got some money on the hook now, and the seller knows that you're going to be moving forward with your best effort, trying to get it entitled, etc. Then, once you get the entitlements in place, you usually will get those entitlements in place, and then you'll have, say, 30 days to then close on that land. We will always, if we're representing a seller, say at that point, you need to get a huge chunk of money out of your buyer, because those entitlements are now a permanent aspect of the property. It has changed it for good. So if you had to somehow go back and unravel a bunch of proffers and zoning, it's going to be really expensive for a seller to take that property back to where it was to start with. So usually we'll ask for a big chunk of money from the builder at that point. Now, the builders may not want to give that up, but that's part of, again, the business terms of the whole process of, how much cash can you put up. In certain aspects, if you're doing a lot takedown contract, then it's possible